The tree had been dead for years. Anyone could see it. The bark had gone the color of old paper. The branches stood bare against the gray October sky, stripped clean by winters that no one in Bracken County remembered being particularly hard. The roots had buckled the earth around the base into a pattern of cracked ridges like something old and stubborn that refused to let go of the ground long after everything else had given up on it. Most people who walked the back edge of Stillwater Road never looked at it twice. It was just a dead elm at the end of a dead stretch of land that nobody claimed and nobody wanted. Half swallowed by kudzu on one side, pressed against a rusted wire fence on the other. The kind of fence that existed not to keep anything in, but to let the world know that someone at some point had cared enough to draw a line. Della Whitfield was not most people. She stopped in front of that tree the way she stopped in front of most things. Slow. Careful. The way you move when your whole life has taught you that rushing past things leads to stepping on the wrong piece of ground. She had been sleeping in the drainage ditch 200 yards east for 11 days. 11 nights of folded cardboard, the cold settling into her hip, where the concrete sloped the sound of trucks on the highway above her, like the breath of something large and indifferent. Before the ditch, there had been a church shelter in the town of Briarton that ran out of beds on a Thursday when 3 families came in from a flooded trailer park, and the numbers stopped working in her favor. Before the shelter, a car that belonged to a man named Wade Crowley, who had seemed kind for about 6 weeks before he stopped being kind. In the particular way some men stop all at once like a switch. Before Wade, a woman named Doreen Whitlock, who rented her a bed in a house with 6 other women, and a policy about no personal items left in the bathroom. Before Doreen, a job at a meat processing plant in Millbrook that paid $11 an hour and smelled like rendered fat and fluorescent light. She was 23 years old. She looked 40 in the eyes. The envelope was nailed to the tree about 4 feet up, which was why most people missed it. At eye level, the tree had nothing to offer. But Della was small, 5'2", and she had a habit of looking at things from odd angles because odd angles were where she had learned the world kept its surprises. She saw the corner of it first. Just a pale triangle peeking out from beneath a strip of bark that had curled away from the wood like a lip pulling back. Her brain registered paper. Before she consciously understood what she was looking at, she pulled the bark aside. The envelope was old. That much was obvious. The kind of yellowed that takes years, not months. But it had been wrapped in something. Some kind of waxed cloth now blackened and stiff, and the wrapping had done its job. The paper beneath was intact. The envelope was sealed, not glued. Sealed with a red wax that had cracked in 2 places, but still held the flap down. Across the front, in handwriting so old, it looked like something from a different century, 3 words in faded ink. For the worthy, Della stood in front of that tree for a long time. She was not a superstitious person. She had been raised by a grandmother who believed in hard work and practical shoes, and the specific mercy of keeping your mouth shut when someone with power was in the room. Her grandmother had died when Della was 16, and after that the practical shoes became impractical very quickly, because practical required a floor to stand on, and floors cost money, and money required a job, and jobs required an address, and addresses required money, and around until the circle ate itself. and she was 23 years old, looking at an envelope nailed to a dead tree at the edge of a road nobody drove on. She slipped the envelope inside her jacket against her ribs where the cold could not reach it. The wind moved through the kudzu like something passing through without looking back. She took one last look at the tree. Then she turned and walked east toward the underpass at the junction of Route 9 and the county road, where she had 3 concrete columns and a tin box and a small candle stub and $4.37 that she had not yet spent because she was saving it for a specific emergency she hadn't yet defined, which meant she was saving it for the next time the world surprised her in the bad way, which was the only kind of surprise she had come to expect. She had not always lived this way. Della tried not to count backward through the years because counting backward led to certain rooms and certain faces and certain Tuesday afternoons that she did not need to revisit. But sometimes walking the past came up beside her like a quiet animal that had decided to follow. Her grandmother had been named Florence Whitfield, a woman built like a fence post and twice as stubborn. Florence had raised Della from the age of 4, after a woman named Cecilia, who was Della's mother, had walked out of an apartment in a town Della no longer remembered the name of and had not walked back in. There had been no forwarding address, no birthday calls, no particular explanation offered to a grandmother on a fixed income, who hadn't asked for any of it but had done it anyway without complaint, the way Florence did most things that needed doing. Florence had cooked soup that was mostly broth. She had bought practical shoes. She had taught Della that the kindest thing you could do for a person was to tell them the truth, in a way that did not make the truth heavier than it had to be. When Florence died, Della was 16. The apartment went first. Then the practical shoes wore through. Then a sequence of rooms and jobs and men with kind voices that turned. And the long, slow lesson that the floor was something you had to keep paying for every month. Forever. She was 23 now and walking toward an underpass with an envelope against her ribs and a feeling in her chest that she did not have a name for. The underpass at Route 9 and the county road had 3 concrete columns that blocked the wind from 2 directions. Della kept a change of clothes in a plastic bag wedged between the middle column and a supporting beam, a tin box with matches, a small candle stub, $4.37. She sat with her back against the column, knees up, the cardboard underneath her, the smell of old motor oil and damp stone. She struck a match. The candle came to life, small and yellow, and the inside of the underpass became for a few feet around her a kind of room. She turned the envelope over in her hands. The wax seal was not just wax. It was 2 interlocked letters, an A and a T, stylized in a way that suggested someone had designed it, rather than just pressed a ring into wax. She turned the envelope over twice. No address. No return address. No postage. Whoever had put this on that tree had carried it there by hand, nailed it, and left it. She broke the seal. Inside were 2 things. The first was a letter 4 pages long, written in the same formal hand as the front of the envelope, with a date at the top that she read 3 times before she believed what she was seeing. The second was a folded document, heavier stock, official looking, with a gold embossed seal in the top left corner. She read the letter first. It began with a name she had never heard in her life. Augustus Theodore Thorne. It began with his name and then it explained who he was. And by the end of the first paragraph, Della's hand was not shaking, which seemed wrong because her hand should have been shaking given what she was reading. But her hands had stopped doing that a long time ago. The same year she stopped crying at things that deserved crying, which was the year she learned that shaking and crying cost energy she could not afford. Augustus Theodore Thorne had been her great-great-uncle. He had died in 1987. He had been born in 1899. He had lived for most of his adult life on an estate called Thorne Hollow, which sat on 412 acres of land in the hill country above Bracken, and which contained a main house, 3 outbuildings, a working well, a spring-fed pond, a timber stand worth what the letter estimated as a significant sum, and a subsurface mineral lease arrangement that had been generating revenue into a trust account for over 30 years. The letter was written by a man named Theodore Whitman, who identified himself as Augustus's attorney and who had drafted the letter in 1986. The year before Augustus died at Augustus's direct instruction. The letter explained that Augustus had no children, that his brothers had produced children, and those children had produced children, but that Augustus had watched the family fracture along lines of money and resentment until he could no longer trust that any of the obvious heirs deserved what he had built. He had written the estate through a specific trust with a specific condition. The deed would not transfer through standard probate. It would wait. It would wait in an envelope on a dead tree at the edge of his land for someone who found it, not because they were looking for it, but because they were the kind of person who looked at things from the right angle. "I have no way of knowing who will find this," the letter said in Whitman's careful penmanship recording Augustus's exact words. "I have no way of knowing when. But I have spent 87 years learning that the right person for any task is not always the loudest or the most connected, or the one already standing in the room. Sometimes the right person is standing outside in the cold looking up at something everyone else walked past. If you were reading this, you were paying attention when others weren't. That is enough. That is, in my experience, everything." Della read those lines twice, then a third time. The candle burned a little lower. The wax pooled at the base of the wick. The second document was a deed of title. The deed of title to Thorne Hollow. The property transferred per the terms of the Augustus Theodore Thorne Perpetual Trust to the bearer upon presentation of this document, and the accompanying letter to the office of Whitman and Associates Attorneys at Law, 44 Meridian Street, Bracken, with any associate of the firm acting as administering trustee upon Whitman's death. The value line at the bottom of the deed filled in by hand read $410 million. A note beneath it said that the figure was a 2019 appraisal and that current market valuations should be sought at time of transfer. $410 million. Della sat under the underpass with the candle burning down and the 4 pages of the letter spread across her knees and the deed held in both hands. And she read it again, then again. Then she blew out the candle because the candle had maybe 30 minutes left, and she did not know when she would find another one. In the dark, she sat with the paper against her chest and listened to the cars going over the road above her. She did not cry. She made a list. It was the kind of list her grandmother would have made. Practical. Sequential. Stripped of hope because hope was a luxury, and right now, what she needed was logic. 1. Was this real? 2. 2. If it was real, why had no one else found it? 3. If she walked into a law office looking the way she currently looked, which was like a woman who had been sleeping in a drainage ditch for 11 days, would they take her seriously? 4. What happened to someone who tried to claim something this large and got it wrong? She did not answer any of the questions that night. She folded the papers back into the envelope, tucked the envelope inside her jacket against her ribs, and lay down on the cardboard she used for insulation. She looked up at the underside of the road above her, and she thought about her grandmother. Florence had mentioned the name once. Della was maybe 9. They were eating soup that was mostly broth, and Florence had said, in the particular way she said things she thought were too important for conversation, that the thorn blood ran in them. The thorn blood was proud blood, stubborn blood, the kind that did not ask for things because it did not need to. Then she had gone back to her soup. Della had been 9 and had filed it away without understanding it. The way children file away things adults say that have weight without explanation. She was 23 now, lying in an underpass with $410 million pressed against her ribs. And she understood it. She did not sleep for a long time. When she did sleep, she dreamed about the tree. In the dream, it was alive, green and enormous, and she was standing at the base of it, looking up through the branches at a light she could not reach. And the bark under her hands was warm. She woke up before dawn, with the cold settled into her bones, the way cold settles when you have been on the ground too long. Deep, specific. The kind that makes your joints feel like they have been packed with gravel. She sat up, checked inside her jacket. The envelope was there. She checked the $4.37. Still there. She needed to think before she walked into that law office. The problem with $410 million is that it attracts attention the moment you mention it. And attention is not always the kind that helps you. Della had learned this about smaller amounts of money. She had learned that the moment you told people you had something, the telling created 100 ways for them to take it. She had watched women at the shelter whisper about another woman who had won $300 on a scratch ticket. And by the end of the week, 2 people had borrowed it. And one person had reported a rumor that she had won more, and the $300 was gone before she could cash it. $300. She was sitting on $410 million, and she did not have a phone, or a working address, or a government ID that was not expired, or a single person in Bracken County who knew her name. That was either a problem or an advantage. She spent 2 days deciding which. She spent those 2 days at the public library in Bracken, which opened at 9 and closed at 6, and had bathrooms where she could wash her face, and a children's section in the back corner, where nobody bothered you if you were quiet and reading, which she was. She read about estate law. She read about perpetual trusts. She read about adverse possession and deed transfer, and the specific legal mechanisms by which property change hands in situations that were not standard. And by the end of the second day, she understood enough to know 3 things. The trust, if it was real, was real. The mechanism Whitman had used was unusual, but not unprecedented. There were documented cases of delayed transfer trusts with bearer deed conditions mostly from the early and mid-20th century, mostly from wealthy eccentrics who had complicated feelings about their heirs. The law office address, 44 Meridian Street, existed. She found it in an old county business directory from 2009. Whitman and Associates, established 1952. Whether it still existed, she did not know. 2009 was a long time ago, and Whitman himself had been writing letters for a man who was already 87 in 1986, which meant Whitman was almost certainly dead, which the letter had anticipated, which was why it said any associate of the firm. On the afternoon of the second day, she did one more thing. She had been thinking about the photograph all night. Her grandmother's voice. The Thorn blood is proud blood. The certainty of it. The way Florence had said it, as if the saying alone was enough. Della went down to the basement of the library where the local history archive lived, behind a glass door with a sign that said, "Reference materials only," and another sign underneath it that said, "Please ask the librarian." She asked the librarian. The librarian, who was about 60 and who had not looked twice at Della in 2 days of watching her come and go, unlocked the door. The archive smelled like old newsprint and dust. Bound volumes of the Bracken Gazette lined one wall, each volume holding a year going back to the 1920s. Della pulled the volume that said 1965. She did not know why she pulled that year. There was no reason for it that she could have explained. Just the feeling that her grandmother had been about 34 in 1965, and 34 was the age her grandmother had once described as the year she finally knew herself. Della had asked her once what that meant. Florence had said only, "You'll find out when you get there." Then she had gone back to whatever she had been doing. The volume was heavy. Della carried it to a table and opened it. She turned pages slowly. The Bracken Gazette of 1965 was a small-town paper full of small-town news, wedding announcements, crop reports, a school board dispute in March. In June, she found it. A 2-page spread with photographs. Thorn Hollow Garden Tour, the headline said. Local estate opens grounds to Bracken Garden Society. There were 5 photographs. Della looked at all of them. The kitchen garden in full bloom. The pond glassy and quiet. The stone house from a distance with its 2 chimneys. And in the center of the spread, a larger image. A man in a wide-brimmed hat standing at the edge of the pond, gesturing towards something out of frame. And next to him, half turned toward the camera, a young woman in a summer dress. Her hair pulled back. Her hand resting lightly on his arm. The caption read, "Augustus Thorn and his niece Florence hosting visitors from the County Garden Society, June 1965. Della stared at the photograph. She did not breathe for what felt like a long time. It was her grandmother. There was no question about it. The face was younger, the hair was darker, but it was the same woman who had cooked her soup and bought her practical shoes and told her once, only once, that the Thorn blood was proud. Her grandmother had stood on the grounds of Thorn Hollow in 1965 with Augustus Thorn, had stood at the edge of his pond, had hosted his visitors. She had known. She had known her whole life. And she had said one sentence to a 9-year-old girl over a bowl of broth, and had let the rest sit unspoken for 40 more years until she died. Della put her hand flat on the photograph. The newsprint was thin under her palm. She thought about all the years her grandmother had cooked soup that was mostly broth. All the years of practical shoes. All the time she had reached the end of a month with not enough left. And somewhere the whole time in some corner of her mind, the knowledge that Thorn Hollow existed and that she had once stood on its grounds and that the blood in her veins traced back to a stone house above Bracken with a pond like hammered silver. She had not gone back. She had not asked. The thorn blood, Florence had said, did not ask. Della closed the volume slowly. She carried it back to the shelf and slid it into its place. She thanked the librarian, who nodded without looking up. Then she walked out of the library and stood on the sidewalk in the late afternoon light. And she understood for the first time in a way she had not understood the night under the candle, that what was happening to her was not random. The envelope on the tree was not luck. The grandmother who had said the one sentence and then died was not coincidence. The whole arrangement, the trust, the tree, the silence, the bowl of soup, all of it was a thing that had been moving toward her for longer than she had been alive. And now she was the place it had arrived. She went back to the underpass. She slept hard that night. The kind of sleep that comes when something inside you has been settled, even if the settling has not made anything easier. In the morning, she washed her hair in the library bathroom sink, using the hand soap staying in the stall, until the librarian knocked and told her they were closing the bathroom for cleaning. She put on the clean shirt from the plastic bag at the underpass. She rubbed her shoes against her jeans until the worst of the mud came off. She looked like what she was, a young woman who had made an effort under difficult circumstances. She could not look like anything else because she did not have access to anything else. And she had decided that trying to perform wealth she did not have would make her seem worse than being honest. She walked to Meridian Street, which was 6 blocks from the library in a part of downtown Bracken, where the buildings were old and mostly offices. An insurance agency, a real estate broker, an accounting firm with a sign that needed repainting. Number 44 was a narrow brownstone with a brass plate by the door, tarnished but legible. Whitman and Associates, established 1952. The lights inside were on. She stood outside it for 4 minutes. She was not afraid. She had stopped being afraid of specific things the year after her grandmother died, because after that year she had discovered that the worst that could happen was usually just another version of what had already happened. And she had survived that. What she felt standing outside Whitman and Associates was not fear. It was the particular weight of a moment she could feel was hinging, the way a door feels heavier right before you push it open. Not because the door has changed, but because you know something will be different once you cross through it. She pushed the door open. The reception area was small and smelled like old paper and coffee. A woman about 50 sat behind a desk with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a phone tucked between her ear and shoulder. She held up one finger without looking at Della and finished her call, made a note on a yellow pad, and looked up. She was the kind of woman who could assess a situation without her face showing the assessment. Della recognized the type. Her grandmother had been that type. "Can I help you?" the woman said. Della put the envelope on the desk. "I need to speak with whoever currently administers the Augustus Thorn Trust," she said. The woman's face did not change, but something moved behind her eyes. She looked at the envelope, then at Della. "Can I ask where you got this?" "A tree," Della said. And then, because that sounded wrong without context, she added, It was nailed to a dead elm on the eastern boundary of the Stillwater Road property. I found it 11 days ago. The woman picked up the envelope careful by the edges, held it the way someone holds something they recognize. She stood up. "Please wait here." She went through a door in the back, and Della heard muffled voices. Then silence. Then more voices. She sat in the reception chair and looked at a frame print on the wall of a covered bridge in autumn. The kind of print that had been on that wall for 30 years and would be there for 30 more. She breathed in and out. She made herself stay still, because stillness was what you had when everything else was uncertain. The door opened. The man who came through was maybe 65, thin, in a gray suit that fit him the way suits fit people who have worn them their whole lives. He had reading glasses in his breast pocket and a particular quality of stillness that meant he had received surprising information and was deciding how to hold it. He held out his hand. "My name is Arthur Hadley," he said. "I'm a senior associate here. I've been with this firm for 32 years. He paused. "Theodore Whitman died in 2003. I administered his practice afterward, and I have been the trustee for the Thorn instrument since then." He paused again. "Please come into my office." The office had bookshelves on 3 walls and a window that looked out onto the back of another building. He sat behind the desk and she sat across from it, and he opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder so thick it had 2 rubber bands around it, and he set it on the desk with the particular care of something that had been waiting. He opened it. The first page was a photocopy of the deed she was holding, or rather the deed she had returned to him because he had taken it when she laid it on his desk, and she had not asked for it back, which was either trust or fatalism or both. He looked at his copy, then at the original she had brought. He said nothing for a long time. "Miss Whitfield," he began. She did not correct him on the last name. He had read it from the deed, perhaps, or from her bearing. He continued, "You will need to establish the lineage. It is a condition of the trust. Augustus's instructions were specific. The bearer must demonstrate Thorn blood through documentary evidence." He paused. "I have to tell you something honestly." She waited. "In the 32 years I have been at this firm," he said, "3 people have come into this office claiming to have found this envelope." He looked at the desk. The first was 2001. The second was 2014. The third was 2019. In all 3 cases, the envelope they presented was a copy or a forgery, or in one case, an envelope that had been manufactured to look plausible. He looked up. "The wax seal on the one you have brought is the original Thorn seal. I know this because I have a photograph of it in this file taken in 1986 when Whitman prepared the instrument. The cracking pattern in the wax matches." He sat back. "This is, to the best of my knowledge, the first time the original document has been presented at this office." Della looked at the file folder. "What happens now?" she said. "What happens now is that I need to verify your lineage, which will take time and require documentation. If you have a birth certificate, your grandmother's death certificate, any marriage records that trace back to the Thorn family." "I have a birth certificate," she said. "I don't carry most of those things. My grandmother's papers are in a storage unit in Briarton. I stopped paying for it 4 months ago. I don't know if they have cleared it." Hadley made a note. I also need to tell you something else, he said. She waited. The trust has been generating revenue since 1991, when the mineral lease arrangement came into effect. The account has not been touched. He opened to a tab in the folder, turned it to face her. She looked at the number. She looked at it for a long time. The way the figure sat on the page in plain type was harder to process than the written-out words had been on the letter. Written out a number is language, and language can be misread, can be dismissed, can be a mistake in transcription or comprehension. But a number on an accounting statement with columns and dates, and a running balance that had been updated as recently as 60 days ago, was a different kind of real. It was the kind of real her grandmother would have said was practical, which was the highest compliment Florence Whitfield ever gave to anything. The mineral lease revenue alone over 34 years, combined with the timber sales the trust had managed, and the property appreciation had brought the total asset value to $412,700,000 and some change. She did not cry. She asked for a glass of water. He got it himself. While he was gone, she looked at the covered bridge print on his wall, which he also had, but in a smaller frame, and she thought about the drainage ditch. She thought about the way the water ran through it when it rained, how she had learned to move her cardboard uphill to avoid the seepage. She thought about the church shelter in Briarton and the 3 families from the trailer park who had taken the last beds, and she thought about them without resentment because they had needed those beds, and she had found her way to an underpass and then to a dead tree, and maybe that was the trade. He came back with water and a box of tissues which he set on the desk without comment, which was kind. She drank the water. He sat. The process, he said, will take time. You will need legal representation of your own. He held up a hand. Not because I'm advising you not to trust this office. Theodore Whitman was a man of integrity, and I have tried to be the same. But you are about to be the subject of significant attention, and you need someone specifically representing your interests. He looked at the folder again. I should also tell you, he said, that I have reason to believe the prior 3 claims were not random. Someone with knowledge of this trust has at various points leaked information to individuals who then attempted false claims. We had a clerk at this firm years ago, a man named Roger Welk, who left under uncertain circumstances and went to work for a law firm in the state capital. The same firm that has on 3 separate occasions represented the family member who has challenged this trust. He let that sit. I cannot prove anything he said, but I have spent 32 years thinking about it. And I want you to know that the people who will come for you over the next few months will have been waiting a long time. They have practice, they have resources, and they have, in one form or another, been preparing for the possibility of someone like you walking into this office. She thought about that. She thought about preparation. She thought about how much of her life had been spent unprepared walking into rooms she did not know the rules of, while other people sat across tables that had been arranged for them long before she arrived. She said, "What kind of resources?" He said, "I will tell you about that. But first, there is something I can do for you immediately." He opened to another tab. The trust instrument provides, he said, for reasonable living expenses to be paid to the identified bearer during the verification period. The figure is at the trustee's discretion. I would consider $2,000 a month reasonable. $2,000 a month. For 11 days, she had been measuring life in terms of whether she could afford a $4 can of soup without breaking into her emergency fund. $2,000 a month felt like a number from someone else's life. She said, "I'll take it." He nodded. "You will need an address for disbursement. Do you have somewhere to stay?" "No." He made another note. "There is a motel on Clement Street," he said. "The Cedar Pines Inn. It's clean, and they rent by the week." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. "Tell them Arthur Hadley sent you, and that the billing will be handled through this office until the stipend arrangement is formalized." She looked at the paper. She looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Because Theodore Whitman spent 32 years hoping this day would come. He believed Augustus was right, that the right person would find that envelope and that, when they did, they deserved what was inside it." He paused. "And because you are sitting in my office with 11 days of a drainage ditch on you, and a deed to a $400 million estate in your hand, and you have not cried or demanded anything or asked me to just hand it all over right now." He paused again. "You made a list. I could see it in your eyes the moment you walked in. You were working through the problem before you had any reason to believe the problem had a solution." He closed the folder. "Theodore would have liked you." She picked up the piece of paper with the motel address. She stood. She put out her hand and he shook it. His handshake was dry and firm and brief. The handshake of a man who had been doing it for a very long time and had nothing to prove with it. She walked back to the reception area. The woman at the desk looked up. Met her eyes, did not smile but did not look unkind either, and went back to her phone call. Outside, the October afternoon had moved into evening. The light on Meridian Street had gone gold and long the way late light does in fall, and the air had the particular sharpness of a season beginning to commit to itself. She walked the 6 blocks to Clement Street. The Cedar Pines Inn was a single-story building with a row of doors painted dark green and a small office at the end, with a neon sign in the window that said, "Vacancy." The woman at the front desk, whose name tag said, "Roberta," made one phone call, talked for 3 minutes, handed Della a key to room 7, without asking any questions that a person in Della's current state could not answer. This was either professionalism or the particular mercy of someone who had seen enough of life to know when questions would only make things worse. Room 7 had a bed with a blue coverlet, a small bathroom with a shower, a television she did not turn on, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot where a man was loading boxes into a truck with the steady, methodical movement of someone who had done this job for years and found it sufficient. She sat on the edge of the bed. She put the envelope on the nightstand. She looked at it. Then she lay down still in her shoes and stared at the ceiling, which was white and water-stained in one corner. She thought about Florence, who had said, "The Thornblood was proud and stubborn and did not ask for things." She thought, "Grandmother, I did not ask. I just looked at the right angle." She fell asleep before she meant to. The deep, boneless sleep of someone whose body has been waiting for a flat surface and permission to stop for 11 days. The next morning, before light, Arthur Hadley's assistant, a young man named Owen Pratt, knocked on the door of room 7 with $40 in petty cash and a printed bus schedule. Della had spoken with Hadley by phone from the motel office the night before. She had told him about the storage unit in Briarton. She had told him she did not know whether they had cleared it. Hadley had called the facility directly, explained that he was the attorney administering a trust on behalf of the registered renter's heir, provided a credit authorization for the 4 months of arrears. This was how it started. The particular way money worked when you had it, or had someone acting on your behalf who did. A phone call resolved in 20 minutes, what she had been dreading for 4 months. The bus to Briarton left at 7:15 and took 2 hours and 40 minutes. It smelled like vinyl and diesel and somebody's perfume from the back of the cabin. Something with artificial vanilla. Della sat by the window and watched the landscape shift from town to highway to the stretched-out flatness of the county before the hills came back up on the other side. She had not been on a bus in over a year that was going somewhere she had chosen to go. Every bus she had taken in the previous 18 months had been going away from something. Away from Wade. Away from the plant. Away from the room at Doreen's house when Doreen raised the rent without notice. Away. Buses going toward places she did not fully want to be chosen, because they were affordable and available and led somewhere that had not yet failed her. This bus was going toward something. She watched the window. The storage facility in Briarton was off the highway. A long row of orange doors behind a chain-link fence. The kind of place that smelled like dust and forgotten things and the specific sadness of objects that outlived the people who cared about them. She paid the arrears at the office window with the credit authorization, received the access code, and walked down the row to Unit 114. The padlock was the one she had bought with her grandmother's spare key. It opened on the first try. Inside, Florence Whitfield's remaining life took up approximately 4 square feet of cubic space. A plastic bin with her kitchen things, plates and cups wrapped in newspaper, 2 boxes of books, a garment bag with her good coat and her church dress, a flat cardboard box that Della knew contained photographs, and at the back, a fireproof metal box. Small. Gray. The kind you bought at a hardware store to hold important papers with a combination she had memorized at 16, because Florence had made her memorize it along with the combination to the old safe at their apartment, treating both with the same seriousness. Left 22. Right 8. Left 31. She knelt on the concrete floor and opened it. Inside were the documents of a life. Florence Whitfield's birth certificate, her marriage certificate to Gordon Whitfield, deceased, Gordon's death certificate, Della's mother's birth certificate listed as Cecilia Ann Whitfield, which was a name Della held for a moment because she had not thought of her mother's full name in a long time. Beneath Cecilia's birth certificate was Florence's own mother's birth certificate, and beneath that a piece of paper that was older than everything else in the box, fragile at the folds, typed on a machine whose keys had been slightly uneven, so some letters pressed harder than others. It was a family record, the kind churches used to keep, the kind of document that traced a lineage through baptisms and marriages and deaths across several generations. And there at the top, unmistakable, was the name. Florence Helen Thorne, born 1931, daughter of Henry Thorne and Marie Beaumont Thorne. Henry Thorne, born 1901, son of Cornelius Thorne, brother of Augustus Theodore Thorne. Della sat on the floor of the storage unit in Briarton with the document in her hands and the cold concrete under her knees. And she understood that her grandmother had known. Not the details, maybe. Not the trust, not the envelope, not the $410 million. But the name. The blood. The stubborn, proud thing that did not ask for what it needed. Florence had known who they were, and had said so exactly once over soup. That was mostly broth to a 9-year-old who could not understand it. She had not said more because more was not hers to claim, or because she had not known more, or because the thorn way of being was to state a thing once, and let it sit, and let the person who needed it find it when they were ready. Della photographed every document with the disposable camera she had bought at the drugstore. She photographed the church record 3 times from different angles. She put everything back in the fireproof box, locked it, carried it with her. On the bus back to Bracken, she held the box in her lap. The hills rose on the western horizon, gold and red and brown, October in its full late form. And she thought about Augustus Theodore Thorne, born 1899, who had lived 88 years without children, who had watched his family fracture along lines of money and resentment, who had written a trust instrument so specific and so eccentric that it had held for over 30 years against 3 attempts, and would now finally reach the person he had somehow known would need it. She did not believe in the supernatural. She believed in something adjacent to it. The persistence of intent. The way a decision made by a person could survive them, could ripple forward through time, could find its target years or decades after the person who made it was gone. Her grandmother had made that kind of decision. Augustus had made that kind of decision. They had sent things forward into the future, and the future had received them. She thought about the tree, dead for years, bark gone gray, roots buckled, still standing. She thought about herself. When she got back to Bracken, she went directly to Hadley's office. He was waiting. She spread the photographs on his desk. He studied them. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up, and for the first time since she had walked into his office the day before, something that was not professional neutrality crossed his face. It was something older and quieter than surprise. It was the face of someone who has waited a long time for a thing they were not sure would ever happen. The Henry Thorne connection, he said, put you in the direct collateral line. Great-grandniece of Augustus. It is well within the trust's definition of Thorne issue. This document alone is likely sufficient if we can get a notarized copy made. She said, "What do we do now?" He said, "I make some calls. There is a family law attorney in this city I trust. Her name is Maeve Bishop, and she is the best person I know for something like this. I'll call her tonight. Tomorrow you will meet with her." She said, "What does it cost?" He said, "The trust pays for it. That is in the instrument." Augustus was thorough. She looked at the photographs spread across his desk, at Florence's name, at Augustus's name, at the chain of baptisms and marriages going back 100 years. She said, "How long before the family finds out?" Hadley was quiet for a moment. "I have a legal obligation to notify the known parties when a claim is filed," he said. "Once I file the claim, which I will do when the documentation is ready, they will have 30 days to respond." He paused. "I would expect them to respond considerably faster than that." She said, "Who are they?" He opened the folder to a section she had not seen before. A page with names, addresses, a brief notation next to each. 7 names. 3 in this state, 2 in neighboring states, 2 more distant. The oldest was a man named Cyrus Thorne Wexler, 71 years old. He lived 40 miles east of Bracken. She looked at the page. She thought, 40 miles. He has been the primary challenger, Hadley said. He has filed 3 motions against the trust instrument over the past 22 years, all denied. But he has resources and he has history with this office. What kind of person is he, she asked. Hadley considered his words. He is a man who was told from a young age that he had an inheritance coming, he said, and who has spent his adult life operating on that assumption. He paused. When that belief is corrected, the correction feels like theft, even when the correct thing was never his. She looked at the page with Cyrus Thorne Wexler's address. She thought about what it would feel like to believe you were entitled to something your whole life, and then have it go to a woman you had never heard of, who had found an envelope on a dead tree. She thought about it carefully. She thought it would feel like the worst thing that had ever happened. She felt something she had not expected to feel, not guilt. She had done nothing wrong, but a kind of weight, the specific gravity of causing pain you did not seek to cause, the way a river does not intend to wear down the canyon but does. Outside Hadley's window, the last of the October light was going. The street had begun to empty. Somewhere 40 miles east, a 71-year-old man was sitting down to dinner, not yet knowing that the long quiet between himself and the thing he believed was his had just ended. She did not know what he looked like. She did not know how he spoke or what kind of house he lived in, or what his father had told him, or how many years he had carried it. She only knew that whatever came next would not be quiet. She gathered the photographs back into the folder. She thanked Hadley, who nodded and told her to be at Maeve Bishop's office at 9 in the morning. She walked out into the cold Bracken evening with the fireproof box under one arm, and the envelope as always against her ribs. The streetlights were coming on. The light pooled yellow on the gray sidewalk. The air had the sharp, clean smell of October that promised the longer cold underneath it. She thought about the tree alone on the back edge of Stillwater Road in the dark. She thought about her grandmother who had stood at the edge of a pond in 1965 and had never gone back. She thought about the man 40 miles east who did not yet know her name but would soon. She started walking toward the motel. She had a list to make. Maeve Bishop's office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had once been a textile mill and still smelled faintly of machine oil and old wood in the way buildings carry their histories in the walls long after the industry is gone. The elevator was slow. The hallway was narrow. The frosted glass on her door said, Bishop Law, in plain block letters with nothing else underneath, which Della later understood was intentional. Maeve Bishop did not need to advertise. She was 51, compact and precise in the way of someone who had decided a long time ago which things were worth energy and which were not. She wore her hair natural and short. She had reading glasses on a beaded chain. Her desk was so clean it looked like she had just moved in. Except the bookshelves behind her were so densely packed, they seemed structural, as if they were holding the wall up. She stood when Della came in, shook her hand, said, "Sit down," poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, then sat across from her and said, "Arthur Hadley called me last night and told me everything he knows, which means I have the outline. I would like to hear it from you." So Della told her. She told her from the beginning. From the drainage ditch to the dead elm to the envelope to the underpass and the candle and the list. She told her about the bus to Briarton and the storage unit and the fireproof box and Florence's name on the church record next to Henry Thorne. She told her about the photograph in the Bracken Gazette from 1965, the one with her grandmother in the summer dress at the edge of the pond. She told it in order, without editorializing, the way her grandmother had taught her to tell things. Start at the start, and stop at the stop, and let the facts carry the weight. Maeve listened without interrupting. She made notes on a legal pad. When Della finished, Maeve looked at her notes for a moment, then looked up. "You said you made a list the first night," she said. "Yes." "What was on it?" Della told her. Maeve's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted slightly. The kind of shift that means you have confirmed something you were already thinking. "Okay," she said. "Here is what you need to understand about the situation you are in." She turned the legal pad around and drew a line down the middle. On the left side, she wrote what the trust says. On the right, what the family will argue. "What the trust says is clear," she said. "Bearer of the original deed. Demonstrable Thorne lineage. Presented to Whitman and Associates. You satisfy all 3 conditions. The trust instrument is 37 years old, has survived 3 prior legal challenges, and the court has upheld its validity each time." She tapped the left side of the page. "This is your ground, and it is solid." She tapped the right side. "What the family will argue is that you found the deed through means that undermine the spirit of the instrument. They will say the tree was on private property and you were trespassing. They will say the deed had been deliberately hidden and not publicly accessible. They will say the lineage documentation has gaps, and that your grandmother's departure from the Thorne name constitutes an effective severing of the bloodline in terms of the trust's intent." She paused. "None of these arguments have legal merit. I want to say that clearly, but they do not need legal merit in the first instance. They need enough substance to get a judge to grant a temporary injunction on the transfer while the challenges are heard. If they get an injunction, the process slows to 12 to 18 months. During that time, you live on the stipend, which is not nothing, but it is not the estate." Della said, "How do we prevent the injunction?" Maeve said, "We file first, before they know you exist. We begin the formal lineage verification through independent genealogical analysis. We get the church record notarized and authenticated. We file a notice of claim with the trust and simultaneously with the county property office. We get ahead of them on every document so that by the time their lawyer is making phone calls, we have already answered the questions the judge will ask. How long does that take? If I work this weekend, which I will, and if the genealogical service I use can turn the authentication around in 5 days, which they can, we file by next Thursday." Della did the math. Thursday was 9 days from now. She said, "What does that cost?" Maeve said it comes out of the trust's legal provision, same as my fees. Augustus was very thorough. That was the second time someone had said that about Augustus Thorne. She was beginning to build a picture of him from the things people said, the way you build a picture of someone you had never met, from the evidence they left behind. A man who was thorough, a man who watched his family fracture and decided to do something eccentric and specific about it. A man who had lived to 88 and left an envelope on a tree. She said, "Tell me about Cyrus Thorne Wexler." Maeve set down her pen. She said, "I have encountered him through the prior challenges. He retained counsel for all three, a firm out of the state capital. Expensive and capable. He has significant resources. His father was one of Augustus's nephews, a man named George Thorne Wexler, who married into the Thorne name and hyphenated. Cyrus grew up being told the estate was the family's rightful inheritance. Della said when Cyrus finds out about me, what is his first move?" Maeve considered. "His first move will be to discredit you, not the document. Because the document is bulletproof, you." She paused. "He will look for anything in your background that suggests instability or bad faith. He will look at the time you have been on the street. He will look for criminal record." She paused. "Do you have one?" "No." "Any involvement with law enforcement that did not result in charges?" She thought. Once, 2 years ago, she had been questioned by a police officer who had found her sleeping in a park in a city 3 hours from here. She had been released without any action being taken, because sleeping in a park was not a crime in that jurisdiction, and she had been polite and cooperative and had a clean record. The officer had taken her name. She told Maeve. Maeve made a note. "He will use that," she said. "Not because it amounts to anything legally, because it gives him a story to tell." She picked up her pen again. "There is one more thing. The estate is currently being managed by a property services company contracted through the trust. They maintain the grounds, handle basic upkeep, do annual inspections. Arthur has already notified them that a claim has been filed and that access should be granted to the claimant for a preliminary viewing." She looked at Della. "You can go see it this week if you want. I would recommend it. Whatever that property means to you on paper will change once you have walked it." She said, "I want to go tomorrow." Maeve said, "I'll arrange it." The man who met her at the gate on Stillwater Road the following morning was named Hollis Granger. He was the kind of man who communicated primarily through function, showing her where to step, which gate to use, pointing out the soft ground near the pond without explaining why it was soft. He had a clipboard and a set of keys in a truck with a Property Services logo on the door. He was clearly accustomed to visiting a place where no one lived, going through the motions of maintenance and leaving. And the presence of a person who was looking at everything with intention made him slightly uncertain in the way people are uncertain when a routine changes. She paid no attention to his uncertainty. She was looking at the land. The gate was set back from the road by a gravel drive that had been overtaken at the edges by grass. Beyond the gate, the drive continued up a gentle rise before turning south toward the main house. The property was not flat. It rolled in the way that hill country rolls with intention. The land deciding where it wanted to be, and the human structures arranged in conversation with that decision rather than against it. She stood at the top of the rise for a moment. She could see most of it from there. The main house was a large stone and timber structure, 2 stories. with a wide covered porch along the front and a chimney at each end. The stone was the local gray limestone the county was built from, quarried and laid by someone who had understood that the point of stone was permanence. The timber was dark weathered, the color of wood that has been outside long enough to become part of the landscape. The windows were intact, all of them, which surprised her given the years of vacancy. The roof had a patch on the east end that was obviously newer than the rest, one of the trust's maintenance interventions. The three outbuildings were to the south and east. A large barn-style structure, a smaller building that might have been a workshop or a smokehouse, and a third that was partly collapsed on one side but whose foundation was clearly sound. Between the main house and the barn, a kitchen garden had been allowed to go mostly wild. But the bones of it were visible. Raised beds and a central path and a trellis where something had once climbed and still tried to. The woody stems of an old climbing rose reaching up through its own abandonment. East of the main house, past a stand of old oaks, the pond caught the morning light and threw it back at a low angle. The kind of light that made the water look like hammered silver. There was no dock, but there was a flat stone at the water's edge big enough to stand on, worn smooth at the center, in the way stones get worn by the repeated presence of someone who stood there often. She walked to it. She stood on it. She looked at the water. From this angle, she could see the far edge of the property where the timber stand began. The taller pines rising above the oaks in a solid dark line. Beyond that, the hill country continued. The blue distance of ridges she did not yet know the names of. The particular depth of a landscape that went on past what you could see. She stood there for a long time. Hollis waited at a respectful distance, clipboard tucked under his arm, not looking at her. She thought about Florence, who had stood at this same stone in 1965, in a summer dress with her hand on Augustus's arm. She thought about Augustus, born 1899, who had built or inherited this stone and timber house, and this pond and this timber stand, who had watched his family come and go and fracture, who had sat at the end of his life thinking about what should come next. She thought about the dead elm at the eastern boundary and realized that from where she was standing, she could see the fence line, the rusted wire, and just at the edge of her vision, the shape of the dead elm rising above the fence, gray and bare, and still standing. She was on the inside now. Hollis coughed softly. She turned. He said the house is unlocked if you want to go through it. They told me to give you the full tour. She said, show me the house. The inside of Thorn Hollow smelled like cold stone and old wood, and the specific neutral smell of a place that has been maintained without being inhabited, cleaned at intervals but not lived in, the way a museum smells before it opens in the morning. The floors were wide plank hardwood, dark with age, solid underfoot. The ceilings in the main rooms were high crossed by timber beams that were original to the structure, still tight in their joints. The main room had a fireplace large enough to stand in, built from the same limestone as the exterior walls, with a mantel of dark timber and an iron fireback, and a hearth swept clean by someone who came and swept it with the same indifferent thoroughness as all the other maintenance tasks. Above the mantel, faint discoloration in the plaster showed where something had hung for many years and been removed. A painting or a large photograph. its ghost remaining in the shape of unfaded plaster. She stood in front of the empty mantel. She thought things were taken from here. She thought, I will fill this room again. The kitchen was at the back of the house, large and well-proportioned with north-facing windows that kept it cool. There was a cast-iron range original to the house and a deep stone sink and shelving that someone had built into the wall with considerable skill. The kind of shelving made to last rather than made to impress. The shelves were empty, except for a single jar, old glass, with a faded label that she could not read from the doorway. She crossed to it. The label said in handwriting that stopped her breath, Florence's September Preserves. She picked up the jar. The seal was intact. Whatever was inside had probably not survived 37 years. But the jar itself was perfect. The glass thick and old-fashioned. The metal lid still flat and unrusted. Her grandmother had made this. Her grandmother had stood in this kitchen at this counter and had put up September Preserves, and Augustus had kept the jar on his shelf for the rest of his life. For decades after Florence left, he had kept it where he could see it every day. She set the jar back on the shelf very carefully, with both hands, the way you set something that is older than you are. Her hands were not steady. It was the first time her hands had been unsteady in years. She stood in Augustus's kitchen, looking at the jar with her grandmother's handwriting on it, and something in her chest cracked open in a way that she did not entirely have language for. Not grief exactly, not happiness, the specific feeling of being recognized by a place she had never been. She went through the rest of the house room by room with Hollis following at a distance, his clipboard forgotten under his arm. The 4 bedrooms upstairs, each with windows looking out onto different aspects of the property. The bathroom plumbed in the 1940s and updated once since functional and plain. A study at the end of the upper hall where built-in shelves still held books. Real books. Left behind because whoever cleared the house had not thought them worth taking, or had known they belonged to the place. She looked at the spines, history, agriculture, natural science, a complete set of encyclopedias from the 1950s, and one book separate from the others, laid flat on the shelf rather than standing. A slim volume with a plain cloth cover. She picked it up. Inside the front cover, in the same careful hand as the letter on the dead elm. A T. Thorne. Private record. 1982. She stood at the shelf with the journal in her hands. She looked at Hollis. He was looking out the window. She opened the journal to the first page. January 4th. Woke early to ice on the pond. The kind of morning that makes the world precise. Every edge sharp. Every line clear. I have been thinking about what comes after me. Not for the first time, but today with a clarity I haven't had before. The family does not deserve this land. That is a hard thing to write. These are blood of my blood. But blood is not character. And character is what the land deserves. She closed the journal. She put it in her jacket. She would read the rest of it somewhere warm, somewhere private, somewhere she could take the time it deserved. Hollis led her back down to the main floor, through the kitchen, out to the grounds. He showed her the barn, which was structurally sound and vast inside. He showed her the workshop, which still held some of Augustus's tools, left because they were too heavy to take and too specific to sell. A lathe and a workbench, and a set of hand planes hanging on a pegboard. in order of size. She stopped at the workbench. She ran her fingers along the edge. The wood was worn smooth at the place where hands would have rested repeatedly. This was the particular wear of use, of genuine work, of someone spending hours at a bench making things. She thought we have that in common. She thought it, and it surprised her. And then it didn't. She came back to Cedar Pines Inn that afternoon and read the journal. Augustus had written in it every few days from January through October of 1982, which meant it covered only 10 months of his 88 years. But those 10 months were full. He wrote about the property in the specific way of someone who knows every square foot of a piece of land and has opinions about each. He wrote about the timber stand and the pond levels and the way the kitchen garden performed in a dry summer. He wrote about the family obliquely with a restraint that read more clearly than anger would have. One nephew had asked about the will. Augustus had declined to discuss it. A cousin had visited twice in a single month, both times convenient to nothing except the continued curiosity about what the old man intended to do with his land and his money. He wrote about being alone, not with self-pity, with the same precision he brought to everything else. She read until the sun set behind the parking lot. She turned on the lamp. She read until she came to the entry from October 17th. Walked the eastern boundary this afternoon. The dead elm at the fence line is going gray. It will be gone in a few years, I expect. I have been thinking about it, not as a landmark, but as something more, a marker. Theodore thinks I'm being sentimental. Theodore is probably right, but there is something to the idea of leaving a message in a place that most people would not think to look. Not hidden, just overlooked. The right person will look. The right person always looks at the things other people pass. She sat still. The dead elm. Not a tree that had died randomly by disease or lightning or age. A tree that Augustus had been watching, had been thinking about. 5 years before he wrote the letter, before he prepared the trust instrument, before he told Theodore Whitman to put that envelope in waxed cloth and nail it to the dead elm at the fence line. He had seen it going gray in 1982, and he had thought, that is where I will leave it. He had watched it and waited. And when the time was right, he had nailed an envelope to a dead tree and trusted that the world would do the rest. She thought, I am the thing you trusted the world to do. She kept reading. She read into the small hours, and just before midnight, she found something she had nearly missed. An entry from September. It was short, almost a fragment. September 8th. George came to the house 3 weeks ago, sat at this kitchen table across from me, asked directly about my plans for the estate. I did not promise anything. I did not say anything, really. I let him talk. He heard what he wanted to hear. When he left, he told the neighbors that everything was arranged. I did not correct that story. Perhaps I should have. Perhaps my silence has become a lie he is carrying back to his family. Della read it twice. George Thorne Wexler. Cyrus's father. The man whose son was now 40 miles east of Bracken, presumably eating dinner, not yet knowing that the trust he had spent 22 years challenging was about to be claimed. She read the entry a third time. I did not correct that story. Perhaps my silence has become a lie he is carrying back to his family. She put the journal down on the bed. She looked at the ceiling for a long time. She thought about a man somewhere in his 50s going to see his rich uncle, sitting at a kitchen table, asking directly, and the rich uncle saying nothing, letting him fill the silence, letting him take the silence home and give it shape and pass it to his son. She thought about how many lies started that way, not by being told, by being heard. She thought Cyrus has been living inside one of those his whole life. She slept a few hours. She did not dream. The next 8 days passed the way significant time passes, slowly at the day level, impossibly fast at the level of what needed doing. Maeve prepared the lineage documentation for formal court submission. The genealogical firm produced a 30-page report tracing the Thorne family line from Augustus's grandfather forward, through all the branches, mapping every marriage, every naming shift, every departure from the surname, including the specific chain that ran through Henry Thorne to Florence Whitfield, to Cecilia Whitfield, to Della Whitfield. The report was thorough. Augustus would have approved. Maeve filed on Thursday at 4 in the afternoon. The notice of claim went to the trust. The simultaneous filing went to the county property office. Within an hour, the filings were public record. Della was at the Cedar Pines when Maeve called her. "It's done," Maeve said. "Now we wait." "How long?" "I would expect Cyrus's lawyers to file something by Monday." It was Friday afternoon. She had 3 days. She used the 3 days as carefully as she had used everything else in her life. She read the journal twice more. She went to the property and walked it. She stood on the flat stone by the pond. She put her hand on the worn edge of Augustus's workbench in the workshop. She went back to Hadley's office and asked Owen Pratt to help her open a small checking account with the trust's stipend, which had arrived on Friday morning, $2,000, the largest single sum that had ever appeared with her name on it. She did not spend it. She did not buy new clothes. She did not buy a phone yet. She let it sit. She thought about her grandmother who had said, "You do not eat the whole jar at once. You eat what you need for today, and you put the jar somewhere safe, and you come back for more when you are ready." On Saturday night, she came back to Cedar Pines from the property at 9 in the evening. She had stayed late at Thorne Hollow, walking the perimeter as the light went, learning the shape of the boundary and the kind of slow attention that only comes from repeated presence. She got back to her room at 9:15. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, turned to lock it behind her, and froze. Someone had been in the room. Nothing was missing. Nothing was obviously moved. But the chair had been pushed against the desk in a way she would not have left it. The bathroom door, which she always left ajar, was closed. She stood, very still. She listened. The room was empty. She backed out into the hallway, walked to the office, and asked Roberta if anyone had been in room 7. Roberta said the housekeeper came through this morning. That was the only time I let anyone in. Della said, "Did anyone ask about me?" Roberta looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "A man came by around 5, about my age, tall. Said he was your cousin and wanted to leave a message. I told him we do not give out room numbers. He left without leaving a message. Della felt something cold travel down the back of her neck. She said, "What did he look like?" Roberta described him. Della knew before Roberta finished the second sentence. It was Wade. Wade Crowley. She had not seen him in 11 months. She walked back to her room, locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and called Maeve from the motel phone. Maeve did not pick up. It was Saturday night. She called Hadley's after-hours number. He answered on the third ring. She told him. Hadley said, "Lock the door, do not open it for anyone, I am coming." He was there in 20 minutes. He had Maeve on the phone by the time he walked in. They moved her that night. There was another motel 10 miles west of Bracken, owned by a woman Hadley had known for 30 years, who took the room. Key said nothing and put Della in a back unit with a steel door and a deadbolt. By Sunday morning, Maeve had filed an emergency request for a restraining order against Wade Crowley, attaching documentation from Della's prior interactions with Wade, including a hospital record from 16 months earlier that Della had forgotten she had until Maeve asked. She had not forgotten. She had buried it. There was a difference. Wade had not yet done anything legally actionable in Bracken. He had come to a motel and asked a question. But he had also, Maeve discovered by Monday morning, told 3 different people in 3 different places that he was Della's husband. Virginia did not recognize common law marriage. Maeve confirmed it twice. There was no legal claim he could make on her or on anything she owned. But Maeve sat across from her on Monday afternoon and said, "This is something I have to tell you clearly. He cannot win in court. But he does not have to win in court to hurt you. And the publicity of this case has put your name in a place where he could find it. We need to assume he is not going to stop on his own." Della said, "I know." She did know. She had known him for 7 months. She had known what he was for the last 4 of those months. She had spent 11 days in a drainage ditch, in part because the drainage ditch was a place where Wade did not think to look. Now he had looked. Now he knew. By Monday evening, Cyrus's lawyers had filed too. A motion for preliminary injunction. The hearing on the injunction motion was set for the following Tuesday, 8 days away. A second hearing, a full verification hearing on the merits, was set for 60 days after that. So now there were 3 timelines running: the injunction, the full hearing, and the Wade timeline, which was not on any calendar. Della did not sleep well that week, but she did sleep some in the back unit of the second motel with the steel door and the deadbolt and the small window that looked out onto an empty lot. She read the journal every night. She read the September 8th entry 7 more times. She thought about George Thorne Wexler, who had taken a silence home and turned it into a story for his family. She thought about how lies last, how they outlive the people who tell them, how they pass like furniture through generations, becoming heavier with each move. The injunction hearing came on a Tuesday. Cold gray sky. Wind that had decided to commit to winter early. Judge Eleanor Beaumont presided. 60 years old. Reading glasses on a chain. The kind of judge who had read every brief filed in her courtroom before she walked into the room, and who listened with her hands flat on the desk, because she was listening for what the words did not say. Pritchard Cyrus's lawyer was good. Della would give him that. He had practiced. He laid out the same 3 arguments his firm had used in 3 prior challenges: mental capacity, bearer deed validity, Plausibility of discovery. He spent 40 minutes on the third argument. He had a private investigator's report. He entered it into the record. The report referenced an incident 2 years earlier in which Della had been questioned by police in a city 3 hours away, sleeping in a public park. The officer had taken her name. No charges had been filed. Pritchard used the word patent. He used the word concerning. He did not say criminal record because there was none, but he danced around it. He let the implication sit. Maeve was ready. She entered the police report itself with the official designation, no action taken, no charges filed. She entered the report from the city's housing services confirming that the park in question had been an officially designated overnight site at the time. She entered a notarized statement from the officer who had questioned Della, who remembered the encounter, and described Della as cooperative lucid, and clearly without other shelter options. Maeve looked at Pritchard across the room. She said, "Your Honor, opposing counsel has introduced an investigator's report that frames a documented absence of wrongdoing as a pattern of concern. I would suggest that the absence of wrongdoing is in fact the absence of wrongdoing." Judge Beaumont made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. Maeve walked the court through the documentation, the genealogical authentication, the church record, the notarized photographs from the storage unit, the journal entry from October 17, 1982, in Augustus's hand. She did not present the September 8th entry. She did not yet need to. Judge Beaumont listened for 2 more hours. She did not interrupt. She did not ask questions. When both sides had finished, she removed her glasses. She said the motion for preliminary injunction is denied. The full verification hearing will proceed as scheduled 60 days from today. Until then, the transfer is stayed only to the extent already specified in the trust instrument's standard verification protocol. She looked at Pritchard. She said, "Counselor, the 3 prior challenges to this trust have failed on the merits. If you intend to mount a 4th, I would strongly suggest you bring something this court has not seen before. The same arguments delivered with new emphasis are still the same arguments." She adjourned. Della sat at the table for a moment. Maeve put a hand briefly on her arm. Cyrus was at the opposing table 60 feet across the room. He had not spoken during the hearing. He had not looked at her. He was looking at his hands folded in front of him on the table. She walked out of the courtroom. She did not feel triumphant. The injunction had been the first round. The full hearing was 60 days away. And the man at the opposing table had not yet by any visible measure begun. On the Wednesday after the injunction hearing, Maeve called her. She said, "I want you to come back to the property tomorrow. There is something Hollis found in the workshop that you should see." Della went. Hollis was waiting for her in the workshop. The pegboard with the hand planes, the lathe, the workbench. He said, "I have been doing maintenance here for 19 years. Quarterly visits since the early days. I have walked through this building probably 100 times. I never noticed this until last week." He pointed at the workbench. The workbench was old and heavy, built into the wall on one side. The top was thick maple, scarred by decades of use. But the front of it, below the work surface, had a panel. And the panel Hollis showed her did not match the rest of the bench. It had been added later, or modified. He had noticed it because the maintenance crew was doing an inventory of original versus added structures, and the bench had been flagged for review. Hollis took a thin metal tool and pried the panel gently. It came loose. Behind it was a small compartment, maybe 8 inches deep, a foot wide. Inside was a leather folio. Della took it out. She opened it on the workbench. Inside the folio was a single sealed letter. The same waxed paper. The same red wax seal. The same AT insignia. Dated in faded ink on the front, November 1982. Below the date, 3 words, for my family. Della stood very still. She looked at Hollis. Hollis said I did not open it. I called Maeve and she said to wait until you got here. Della picked up the letter. She broke the seal. Inside were 2 pages in Augustus's handwriting, the same as the journal, the same as the letter on the tree. She read. To the family, the letter began. I am writing this not because I expect you to find it, but because I believe a man should leave the truth somewhere, even if only the workbench in his workshop knows where it is. In September of this year, George came to the house. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked in his careful way about my plans for the estate. I said nothing of substance. I let him talk. I have in my life become a man who is comfortable with silence. George is not. George needed to fill it. He filled it with his own assumptions and his own hopes, and his own particular interpretation of what I might mean by not contradicting him. When he left, he told my neighbor, a man named Walter Cooper, that everything was arranged, that the estate was, in his words, taken care of for the family. I did not correct him. I have spent 2 months wondering whether that was a kindness or a cowardice. I have decided that it was something between the two. George is a man who has been telling himself a story about this property for as long as I've known him. He is not a wicked man. He is a man whose father, my brother, told him from a young age that the Thorne estate was the family's inheritance, and who has built his understanding of his life around that assumption. His son, who I have met twice, is the same. I cannot fix what was begun before I was old enough to see it, but I can refuse to add to it. I should have told George in September that I was not arranging this estate for the family in the way he meant. That I had been thinking for years about whether any of them deserved it. That I had come to a conclusion he would not want to hear. I did not say it. I let him leave with his story. And so here in this letter, which I will hide in the place where I have done my work, I will say it. The estate is not arranged for the family. It is arranged for whoever finds the envelope. It may be a family member. It may not be. I have left that to chance and to the kind of attention that I trust the universe occasionally rewards. If you are reading this and you are family and you are disappointed, I am sorry. I am sorry for my silence, which I now understand was a small lie I let you carry. I am sorry that your father or your grandfather or whoever told you the story told you something I did not contradict in time. But the estate was never yours. It was mine. And now it is whoever's. I hope when you read this you are old enough to forgive me. I hope you are old enough to know that the things we are told about our inheritance are sometimes what kept us from making our own. Augustus. Della finished the letter. She read it again. She thought about Cyrus. She thought about a man who had spent 22 years filing motions, hiring lawyers, paying tens of thousands of dollars to a firm in the state capital. a man whose father had taken a silence and made a story out of it. She held the letter. She thought I could destroy him with this. She thought in open court in 60 days if I hand this to Maeve, and Maeve hands it to the judge. Cyrus's entire understanding of his life ends in a single morning. He learns in public on the record that his father lied to him, that his grandfather lied to his father, that the inheritance he has spent his life pursuing was never anything but a silence misread. She thought about it for a long time. Hollis stood at the door of the workshop and did not say anything. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about Florence, who had said when Della was 12 and had come home crying about a girl at school who had called her something cruel. You do not have to use every weapon you find. Some weapons you find, you put them in your pocket. You go home. You do not raise them. The kind of person who raises every weapon they find ends up alone holding all of them with no hands left for anything else. She thought the thorn way is not to destroy. She folded the letter carefully. She put it back in the leather folio. She looked at Hollis. She said, "I need to take this with me. I need to think." Hollis nodded. She drove back to the second motel. She sat on the bed with the folio in her lap. She read the letter 4 more times. She called Maeve. It was almost midnight. Maeve picked up on the second ring. Della said, "I found something. I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm also going to tell you that I do not want to use it the way you are going to want to use it." Maeve was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me." Della told her. She read the letter aloud slowly all the way through. Maeve did not interrupt. When Della finished, Maeve was quiet again longer this time. Finally, she said, "You understand what this is? Yes. You understand that this is the kind of document that ends a case in one morning?" "Yes." "And you are telling me you do not want to use it in court?" "Yes." She said, "I want to give it to him. To Cyrus. Privately. Before the hearing. Without conditions." Maeve said, "Why?" Della said, "Because the only way he loses his story for good is if he reads it for himself. If we put it in front of a judge, his lawyers will tell him it was forged. They will tell him it was planted. The only way he believes it is if it comes to him in private, and he sits with it and he decides for himself what to do with it." Maeve was quiet. She said, "You understand that if you give it to him privately and he chooses to suppress it, we lose our strongest evidence for the verification hearing." Della said, "I know." Maeve said, "You understand that we have a winnable case without it. The lineage documentation is strong. The injunction has already been denied. But you are giving up insurance." "I know." Maeve was quiet for a while. Finally, she said, "Why?" Della looked at the ceiling. She thought about Florence in 1965 in a summer dress. She thought about Augustus sitting at the kitchen table with George, choosing silence. She thought, if I use this in court, I become part of that chain. I take the silence Augustus could not break, and I weaponize it. She said to Maeve, "I am doing this because my grandmother would have done it. That is all." Maeve was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, "I am going to argue with you about this in the morning." Della said, "Okay," Maeve said. "But I have to tell you off the record that I have been doing this work for 26 years. and I have never heard a client say what you just said. Della said my grandmother was an unusual woman. Maeve said so are you. She hung up. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark of the back unit with the steel door, and she thought about how to do the thing she had decided to do. The decision had been the easy part. The execution was harder. You did not simply walk up to a 71-year-old stranger's house with a letter that would unmake his life and hand it to him on a Tuesday morning. There had to be a way. There had to be a place. By the time the light came through the window, she had it. She called Maeve at 7. Maeve answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting. Della said there is a coffee shop in Wexler Falls called Whitwell's Bakery. Cyrus goes there every morning. Hollis told me. He said the entire county knows it. Same booth, same time, 6:30. Maeve said you want to walk up to him in public. Della said I want to walk up to him in a place he chose, where he is comfortable, where he is on his own ground. I do not want him to feel cornered. I do not want him to feel ambushed. I want him to feel as much like himself as possible when he reads it. Maeve was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "When?" Della said, "Tomorrow morning." Maeve said, "I will be in my car a block away. If anything goes wrong, you call me." Della said, "Nothing will go wrong." Maeve said, "You don't know that." Della said, "I know enough." She got to Wexler Falls at 6:15 the next morning. She had driven the used sedan she had bought 2 weeks earlier with part of the first stipend. A 12-year-old car the color of old dishwater that ran clean and had good tires and felt when she sat in it like a private room she could lock from the inside. She parked across the street from Whitwell's Bakery. She watched. At 6:28, a man came out of a small white house at the end of the block, walked toward the bakery with the steady gait of someone who had walked the same route for many years. He was tall, broad-shouldered, white hair under a dark cap, a dark jacket. The kind of clothing a man wore when he was not trying to be seen by anyone in particular, but expected to be seen by everyone he passed because everyone he passed already knew him. She watched him cross the street and go into the bakery. She waited 3 minutes. She got out of the car. She crossed the street. She pushed open the door of Whitwell's Bakery, which smelled like coffee and butter, and the particular yeast smell of a place where bread had been rising since before dawn. The woman behind the counter looked up, registered Della as a stranger, and went back to wiping the espresso machine. Cyrus Thorne Wexler sat in the corner booth. He had a newspaper open in front of him, a cup of coffee, a small plate with a half-eaten pastry. He was reading. He had not yet looked up. Della walked across the bakery. 6 steps, maybe 7. She stopped at his booth. He looked up. His eyes were brown and clear. The face was deeply lined. The hands holding the paper were large knuckles thick, the hands of a man who had done physical work for a long stretch of his life, even if he no longer did it. He looked at her the way you look at a stranger who has stopped at your table for a reason you cannot yet identify. She said, "Mr. Thorne Wexler, my name is Della Whitfield. I am not here to argue with you. I am not here on behalf of my attorney. I have something I want to give you, and then I am going to leave. You do not have to read it now. You do not have to do anything with it. It is yours." She set the leather folio on the table. Beside it, she set a single sheet of paper on which she had written in her own handwriting the night before 3 sentences. "This is the truth. I am not asking you to do anything with it. I thought you deserved to know." She did not sit down. She did not say anything else. She turned, walked out of the bakery, crossed the street, got into her car, and drove away. She did not look back. Maeve was parked 1 block over. She pulled out behind Della. They drove in convoy back to Bracken in silence. The verification hearing was 6 weeks away. For all 6 of those weeks, Cyrus did not call. His lawyers did not file anything new. The hearing was scheduled. Maeve continued preparing her case as if the letter did not exist. Della had insisted on this. If Cyrus chose to suppress what she had given him, the case had to be winnable without it. Maeve had said, "You are making this much harder than it needs to be." Della had said, "I know." 3 weeks before the hearing on a cold Thursday in early January, Wade Crowley was arrested in a small town 2 counties over for violating the restraining order Maeve had filed against him on Della's behalf. He had gone to a house belonging to a woman he had recently begun seeing in a place where Della had never been, and he had told the woman over the course of an evening that he had a wife in Bracken who owed him a substantial sum of money. The woman had called the police. The police had run his name. The restraining order pulled up on the screen. He was arrested that night. In the search of his car, the police found a notebook in which Wade had written down the address of Cedar Pines Inn, the address of Bishop Law, the address of Whitman and Hadley, and a list of dollar figures he had estimated from a newspaper article published the previous fall. He pled to a violation of the restraining order and to attempted extortion. He was sentenced to 18 months in state prison. Maeve called Della on a Friday morning to tell her. Della was at Thorn Hollow. She had been granted weekly access during the verification period. She was in the kitchen at the window over the deep stone sink, looking out at the kitchen garden which was under a thin January snow. She listened. She said, "Thank you." She hung up. She stood at the window for a long time. She had not realized until that moment how much of her body had still been waiting, not visibly, not in any way that another person would have seen, but somewhere in her shoulders, in the back of her neck, in the way she sat down in unfamiliar rooms, she had still been bracing. She let it go. She put her hands flat on the stone of the windowsill. She breathed in and out slowly, the way her grandmother had taught her. Outside, a single crow lifted off the kitchen garden fence and flew east toward the timber stand in a long, unhurried line. The morning of the verification hearing, the sky over Bracken was the particular flat gray of a January day that had not yet decided what it was going to be. Della wore the best clothes she had. They were not particularly good, but were clean and pressed by the iron in the second motel. She carried the fireproof box with Florence's documents. She walked to the courthouse with Maeve at her side and Arthur Hadley a half step behind. The courthouse was a solid limestone building, 4 stories, broad steps, institutional gravity. She climbed the steps without feeling much of anything. Inside the courtroom was the same room as the injunction hearing. Judge Beaumont, the same bench, the same flag in the corner, the same light coming through the windows at an angle that did not seem to vary by season. Cyrus was already seated at the opposing table. He wore a dark suit, white shirt, no tie. Pritchard sat to his right with files spread open in front of him. A second attorney on his left, younger, taking notes. Cyrus did not look at her when she sat down. He looked at his hands folded on the table in front of him. The hearing began. Pritchard spoke first. He laid out the 3 arguments his firm had used at the injunction hearing and in 3 prior challenges over 22 years. Mental capacity of the testator, validity of the bearer deed clause, implausibility of the claim discovery. He spoke for an hour and 40 minutes. Maeve responded. She walked the court through the genealogical authentication. She presented the church record with the independent verification from 2 genealogists. She entered the timeline of Della's documented movements for the 26 months prior to the discovery. She presented the affidavit from Hollis Granger regarding the workshop, the property, the years of maintenance. She presented the journal entry from October 17, 1982. She did not present the hidden letter. She did not mention George Thorne Wexler. She did not breach the confidence Della had asked her to keep. Then she called Della to the stand. Della told it the way she had told it 3 times before. The drainage ditch, the 11 days, the odd angle, the waxed cloth, the candle in the underpass. Pritchard cross-examined for 20 minutes. He found no inconsistency. There was none to find. He sat down. Judge Beaumont said she would take a 30-minute recess and then deliver her ruling. The 30 minutes passed. Della sat at her table. She did not look at Cyrus. Maeve organized her folders. Then the side door opened and Cyrus stood up. He had not stood when the judge left the room. He was standing now before she returned. Pritchard looked at him. Cyrus said quietly but clearly, "Sit down, Mr. Pritchard." Pritchard did not sit down. He stood up. Cyrus said louder, "Sit down, Mr. Pritchard. I'm letting you go." The second attorney looked at Pritchard. Pritchard looked at Cyrus. Cyrus turned to the bailiff and said, "When the judge returns, I would like to address the court." The bailiff said, "Sir, that is not a procedure that I am not asking." Cyrus said, "I am informing you. When the judge sits down, I will stand up. You can do what you need to do." He sat back down. Pritchard, after a long moment, sat back down too. The door opened. Judge Beaumont returned. Everyone rose. She sat. Everyone sat. She opened the folder in front of her. She put on her reading glasses. She began to speak. Cyrus stood up. "Your Honor," he said. Judge Beaumont stopped reading. She looked at him over the rims of her glasses. She said, "Mr. Thorne Wexler, you have counsel." Cyrus said, "I am dismissing my counsel. I would like to address the court." Pritchard said, "Your Honor," Cyrus said with a quiet authority that filled the room. "Mr. Pritchard, you do not work for me anymore. Please sit down." Pritchard sat down. Judge Beaumont looked at Cyrus for what felt like a long time. She said, "Mr. Thorne Wexler, this is highly irregular." Cyrus said, "Your Honor, I understand. I will not waste your time. I have something to say, and I would like to say it on the record, and then I will accept your ruling without further proceedings." The judge looked at Maeve. Maeve looked at Della. Della looked at Cyrus. The judge said, "You may proceed." Cyrus stood very still for a moment, with his hands at his sides in front of his table. The room was completely quiet. He said 6 weeks ago, Ms. Whitfield came to a coffee shop in Wexler Falls and handed me a letter. A letter that my great-uncle Augustus Thorne wrote in November of 1982 and hid in a compartment in his workbench. The letter explained that my father, George Thorne Wexler, had visited Augustus in September of 1982 and had asked directly about the estate. Augustus had said nothing of substance. My father had heard what he wanted to hear. He left and he told our neighbor that everything was arranged. He came home and told my family that everything was arranged. He told me when I was 22 that the estate was ours. He repeated it on his deathbed when I was 33. Cyrus paused. His voice was steady. His hands were not. I believed him, he said. For 49 years. He took a slow breath. The letter Ms. Whitfield gave me was clear. Augustus did not arrange anything for our family. He left it to chance. He left it to whoever found the envelope. He left it to attention. He apologized in the letter for his silence, which he understood had become a lie my father carried home. Cyrus looked down at the table. I have spent 22 years filing motions against this trust. I have paid Mr. Pritchard's firm and the firms before his an amount of money I do not care to enter into the record. I have done this on the basis of what my father told me and what my grandfather told my father, and on the basis of a story that it turns out was never true. He looked at the judge. I would like to withdraw my opposition to Ms. Whitfield's claim. The judge said, Mr. Thorne Wexler, you understand that this is a final action. I do. You understand that you are foreclosing any future challenge. I do. You understand that your prior pleadings in this case will remain part of the record. I do. The judge looked at him for another long moment. Then she said, the court accepts your withdrawal. She turned to Maeve. She said, Miss Bishop, the court finds that the trust instrument is valid. The lineage is established and the bearer requirement is satisfied. The transfer of Thorn Hollow, comprising 412 acres, with all structures and appurtenances as described in the trust instrument, from the Augustus Theodore Thorne Perpetual Trust to Della Whitfield, great-grandniece of Augustus. Theodore Thorne is hereby approved. The county property office will process the deed transfer within 30 days. The trust assets, including the accumulated revenue, will transfer to Ms. Whitfield's designated account upon completion of the county filing. She removed her glasses. That is the ruling. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The sound it made was the smallest sound Della had heard all morning. Almost gentle. She did not stand up immediately. Maeve put her hand briefly on Della's arm. Hadley in the gallery did not move. The room emptied around them slowly. Pritchard packed his files without looking at his client. Cyrus stood at his table. He looked across the room at Della. He did not move toward her. He waited. She stood up. She walked across the courtroom and stopped at the edge of his table. Cyrus said, "Thank you." Della said, "You did not have to do that the way you did it." Cyrus said, "I did. I have spent my life letting other people speak for me. I did not want to let a lawyer speak for me on the day I was finally telling the truth." He paused. He said, "My father told me when I was 22 that Thorn Hollow was ours." He said it like a promise. He repeated it 11 years later on his deathbed. I have organized my life around those two sentences for 49 years. He paused again. You took them apart in one morning, and you did it without humiliating me. He looked at her steadily. I do not know what to do with that yet, but I know what it was. She said, my grandmother would have done the same thing. He said, your grandmother. She said, Florence Whitfield. She lived at Thorn Hollow when she was young. She is in the 1965 garden tour photograph that ran in the Bracken Gazette. She knew Augustus. She walked away from the family. She raised me. She told me once that the thorn blood does not destroy what does not need destroying. Cyrus stood very still. He said Florence was your grandmother. She said, yeah. He said I met her once. I was 8 years old. My father took me to visit Augustus, and there was a young woman at the kitchen table who made the best biscuits I have ever eaten in my life. He paused. He said she had your face. Della did not answer. She did not trust her voice. He said, Ms. Whitfield, if you would ever allow me, I would like to come to the property, not as a claimant, not as a relative, as someone who used to know that house a long time ago when there was someone in it. She said, the spring would be good. He said the spring would be good. He put out his hand. She shook it. His grip was dry and firm, the grip of a man who had been waiting a long time to let go of something heavy, the handshake of someone who for the first time in 50 years did not have to keep holding it. She walked out of the courtroom. Maeve was waiting on the steps. Hadley was beside her. The January air was cold and sharp. Maeve said, in 26 years of practice, I have never seen a defendant fire his attorney in open court and dismantle his own case on the record. Della said he did that himself. Maeve said he did that because you gave him a place to do it. Hadley said Theodore would have liked this. They walked down the steps together. The county filing took 30 days, as the judge had specified. Within that 30 days, Hadley filed the paperwork to release the trust assets, the mineral lease account, the timber sales reserve, the appreciation track value of the property itself. All of it moved. The total transfer to Della Whitfield's account by the end of February was $412,700,000 and some change. She did not look at the number for a week. When she did look, she sat at the small desk in the second motel for a long time, and she made another list. It was longer than the first list. It had different items on it. But it was made the same way. Practical. Sequential. The way Florence had taught her. Spring came late that year, but completely. By the middle of April, the ground at Thorn Hollow had warmed enough to turn, and a woman named Mabel Donnelly had begun in the kitchen garden. Mabel was 60. She had been gardening professionally in Bracken County for 30 years. She had come to the property for an interview, walked the kitchen garden once gone back to the path, and said only this soil is extraordinary. Someone took great care of it. And that was when Della knew she was the one. Mabel brought a small crew with her. They worked carefully. The original beds were preserved. The drainage channel Augustus had laid was found beneath decades of leaf mulch intact. The composting system was rebuilt to its original design. By May, the first plantings were in. Jasper Hartwell came in April too, 40 years old, quiet. A carpenter Hollis had recommended. He walked through the main house and the outbuildings on his first day, and at the end of the walk he said, "The bones are exceptional. This will be straightforward work." He started with the third outbuilding, the one with the partly collapsed wall and used timber from the property's own stand, under guidelines Hadley had confirmed were within the trust's original allowances for sustainable use. By June, the third outbuilding was sound. He had moved on to restoring the lofting system in the barn. Tess Lindley came at the end of April. She was 20. She had grown up on a farm outside Bracken. She had read the job posting that Della had written herself in plain prose, and had written back that she had been looking for exactly this kind of work, without knowing it existed. Della had read her letter twice. Then, she had hired her on the spot. Tess worked in the kitchen garden with Mabel. She learned the original rotation system. She understood within a few weeks the logic Augustus had used in the layout. She began to extend the bed south along the wall in a way that preserved the original structure and extended it naturally, the way a sentence extends when you understand the grammar of what came before. Hollis Granger stayed on as property manager. He still wore his clipboard, but he no longer walked the property as a man visiting somewhere empty. He walked it as a man visiting somewhere that had begun again to be lived in. Della moved into the main house at the end of April. She did not bring much. The fireproof box with Florence's documents, the journal, the original envelope from the dead elm, the Bracken Gazette photograph from 1965, which she had asked the library archivist to copy for her, and which now sat in a small frame on the kitchen shelf between the jar of September preserves and a beeswax candle she had bought at the farmer's market with the last $4.37 of her old emergency fund. She slept in the master bedroom on a mattress she had bought with a portion of the first full monthly transfer, plain and good, set directly on the hardwood floor because she had not bought a frame yet and was not in a hurry to. She lay in the dark on the first night and listened to the house, the timber settling as the temperature dropped, a low and distant creak, the wind finding a gap somewhere near the east chimney and making a tone, the rose on the trellis moving against the wood outside. She thought, "This is mine, not in the way of possession, in the way of belonging." Cyrus came in early June. He drove himself in a truck that was old and clean, the truck of a man who maintained his equipment because maintenance was a value rather than a chore. He pulled in at the gate and Della was already there waiting because she had asked him to come at 9, and it was 5 to 9. He got out of the truck. He stood at the gate. He looked at the property. She let him look. He stood there for a long time, the June trees in full leaf, the kitchen garden visible to the south green and ordered, the oaks beyond the house, the pond catching the morning light through the trees. She watched his face. She had been watching faces her whole life. He was looking at his childhood. He said the south slope. He used to have 20 apple trees on the south slope. She said, "I found 4 of them. Mabel thinks there is a 5th that might come back if we work on it this fall." He looked at her. He said Augustus called the corner tree the keeper, said it made better fruit than the rest because it had the most weather. He said the fruit that grows in difficulty is sweeter than the fruit that grows easy. She said, "I found it last August. It is already setting fruit this year, earlier than the others." He nodded. the nod of a man receiving confirmation of a thing he had hoped was still true. They walked the property for almost 3 hours. She showed him the kitchen garden and what Mabel and Tess had done with it. The original beds restored, the southern extension following the wall. He walked the rows. At one point, he crouched down and took a handful of soil and held it. Let it fall through his fingers. He said, "I do not know much about gardening, but I know this is good soil." She said Mabel says someone took exceptional care of it for decades. He said Augustus spent more time in this garden than anywhere else near the end. Said it was the honest work, that everything you put in you got back. She thought about 34 years of mineral lease revenue compounding into a number. She thought about a trust that returned to its bearer everything Augustus had put into it over a lifetime. She thought he was not just talking about the garden. She took him to the workshop. He stood at Augustus's workbench, his hands on the worn edge, and said nothing for a while. Just looked at the hand planes on the pegboard still in their painted outlines. Every one returned to its exact position. He looked around, looked at the pegboard, looked at the bench. He said, "Where was it?" She showed him. She knelt down and pointed at the panel. She said, "Hollis found it during an inventory." Cyrus looked at the panel for a long time. He said, "You could have used what was inside that to destroy me." She said, "I know." He said, "Why didn't you?" She thought for a long moment about how to answer. She said, "My grandmother told me once that you do not have to use every weapon you find. Some weapons you find you put in your pocket. You go home. You do not raise them." She paused. She said, "When she told me that I was 12, I did not understand it. I understood it for the first time when I was holding that letter." Cyrus stood for a moment. He said, "I have spent 50 years thinking about Thorn Hollow. I have spent 50 years thinking I knew what my family was. I have spent 50 years building a particular man around a particular story." He looked at her. He said, "Your grandmother walked away from this place. My father built his life around it, and we ended up where we ended up." She said, "Yes." He said, "I am sorry for what I did to you, for the motions, for the lawyers, for the years." She said, "You do not have to be sorry to me. You did not know." He said, "I am sorry anyway." She took him to the pond last. They stood at the flat stone at the water's edge. The June light was coming off the water at the particular angle she had been watching since October. The hammered silver. She knew the hours of it now. She had stood here in winter ice and spring green and summer still heat. She had not missed a morning. Cyrus stood beside her. He said, "I used to fish this pond as a boy." He never stocked it, but it always had fish. He said the land provided what it provided, and it was not your place to improve on it. She said, "I have been thinking about building a dock." He looked at her. She said, "Not a big one, just enough to sit on at this hour, to watch the light." He looked at the water. He said, "That is where Augustus used to sit, on that stone, every morning before 7, rain or shine." She said, "I have been doing that since October." He said, "All seasons." She said, "Winter, spring, summer, autumn, I have not missed a morning. He was quiet for a long time. He said he would have said you were the right person. She said I think he did say that. In 1986. He just didn't know my name yet. Cyrus made a sound that was close to a laugh, the shape of one, the beginning of something his face had not done in many years. When he left, he said, if it would be all right with you, I would like to come back. Not to interfere, not to claim anything, just to be here sometimes, with permission. She said, you do not need permission. You just need to come. He nodded. He drove out. She stood at the gate until the truck turned off Stillwater Road and was gone. Then she walked east along the fence line. The dead elm was still there. She had not touched it. She had not cut it down or cleared it, even though the cleanup along the eastern boundary had given her reason to. She had left it because it was Augustus's marker, his chosen place, the specific tree he had watched go gray in 1982 and trusted to hold what he needed to leave. She put her hand on the bark, still gray, still bare, still standing. The roots buckled into their pattern of cracked ridges, the branches reaching in every direction with the particular patience of something that had been waiting a long time and was not finished waiting yet. She said, you did your job. She said, thank you. She walked back up the path. In September, she founded the foundation. She had thought about the name for months. She had thought about Florence, the obvious choice, the woman who had raised her, the woman who had said one sentence about pride and lived an entire life of quiet integrity beside a story that, had she chosen to speak it, would have changed her circumstances completely. Florence belonged on the door. But there was another name Della kept circling, a name she had never met as a person, only as an idea. When she was 8 years old, Florence had told her a story about a woman named May, who had lived 2 doors down from them in the apartment building on Hickory Lane. May had been a baker. She had kept a porch light on every night all night, even after her husband died, because she said you never knew when someone would be walking past and need to know that somebody was home. Della had remembered the story without understanding why. She had remembered it for 15 years. She named the foundation the Florence and May Whitfield Foundation. The purpose was specific. She had written the founding document herself, to provide transitional housing legal assistance and documentary support to people experiencing homelessness who had legitimate claims on property inheritance or benefits they lacked the resources or knowledge to access. People in drainage ditches, people without phones, people without the particular combination of circumstances that had produced a Della Whitfield standing at the right angle on the right morning. The first person the foundation helped was a 19-year-old woman at the Briarton Mission Shelter. Her name was Lila Riley. Her grandmother had died 8 months earlier and had left her a small house in a town 3 counties over. But the grandmother's brother had filed claim on the property on the basis that Lila, who had been sleeping in the shelter on the night her grandmother died, had been unable to attend the reading of the will. The brother had occupied the house. He had told Lila he would call the police if she came near it. He had told her repeatedly that the law was on his side. The law was not on his side. Lila had not known that. She had not known where to go. She had not known how to file. She had not known that her grandmother's will, which had been registered in probate, named her unambiguously as the heir. The foundation paid for her legal representation. The foundation paid for her transportation to the county where the house was. The foundation paid for the lock change once the court order was issued. Lila moved into the house on a Wednesday in October. Della drove her there. They stood on the porch together in the late afternoon light. Lila said, "I have not had a key in 2 years." Della said, "I know." Lila said, "How did you find me?" Della said, "My grandmother told me about a woman who kept her porch light on for strangers. I have been thinking about that story since I was 8. Lila turned the key. The door opened. Della drove back to Thorn Hollow that night. She arrived at the property after dark. The October air had gone cold. She let herself in through the gate, drove up the rise parked at the house, and walked to the eastern fence line in the dark with a flashlight in her hand. She stood at the dead elm. She said nothing this time. She just stood there. Above her, the bare branches reached into a sky full of stars. The autumn cold had cleared the air. She could see all of it, the whole sweep of it. She thought, this is what you wanted, Augustus. Not the estate, not the money, the next thing, the thing after. She walked back up the path. By November, the property had taken on the rhythm of a place that was inhabited. The kitchen garden had been put to bed for the winter. The beds turned and covered the cold frame on the south wall ready for early spring planting. Mabel had drawn up a planting plan for the following year and had handed it to Della in late October. With the same matter-of-fact precision she brought to everything, Della had read it. Della had approved it. Della had filed it in a folder marked Simply Garden in the study where it joined the journal and the photographs and the slow accumulating record of a life beginning to be lived in one place. Jasper had finished the barn loft in September. He had moved on to the back porch of the main house, replacing 2 posts that had rotted through. Tess had taken Mabel's planting plan home with her and had come back with 3 pages of her own notes which Mabel had read carefully and had incorporated. Hollis still walked the property each Tuesday, but he no longer needed his clipboard. Maeve called once a month with updates on the foundation's caseload. There were 11 open cases by November. 3 had closed. 8 were in progress. Lila Riley's was the first. There would be many more. Hadley had come for dinner twice. Della had cooked. The meals had been simple. She had not yet learned to cook the way her grandmother had cooked, but she was working on it, and Hadley, who lived alone, had not seemed to mind that the bread was slightly underbaked, or that the soup was in some essential way still mostly broth. He had said Theodore would have come for these dinners. I am glad to come for him. She had said, you do not come for him. You come for yourself. He had nodded. He had finished his soup. Cyrus came back in late October. He brought a box of photographs. These were in my father's things, he said. After my father died, I kept them. I did not know what else to do with them. She took the box. Inside were photographs of Thorn Hollow. Decades of them. Black and white, an early color, and the particular saturated quality of photographs from the 1970s. The house as it had been. The orchard in full bloom, 20 trees in a row on the south slope, their spring flowering so heavy the branches bent. The kitchen garden in summer abundance. The pond in winter with a proper freeze, a man standing on the ice in the center, arms out laughing. She picked up that photograph. She said, "Is this Augustus?" Cyrus said, 1962. He was 63. He skated on that pond every winter that it froze hard enough. He had opinions about how to test the ice. She looked at the photograph. A man at 63, arms out, on a frozen pond, laughing. The particular joy of a person fully in a place, fully present, fully alive to the specific quality of a winter morning on a pond he had stood at every day for decades. She thought about the flat stone at the water's edge. She thought about the dock she had not yet built. She thought, next winter, if the ice comes, I will test it the way he did. She would need to learn how. She looked at Cyrus. She said, "Will you show me?" He said, "Show you what?" She said how to test ice. What he knew about this property that is not in any document. Everything you saw here as a boy and remember. She held up the box. Everything that goes with these photographs. He looked at the box. He said that could take a while. She said, "I am not in a hurry." He said, "All right." He set the box on the kitchen table. He sat down. She poured him coffee. They began. That night after Cyrus left, Della walked out to the eastern fence line one more time. It was full November. The cold had settled into the ground. The first snow was a few weeks away, maybe less. She stood at the dead elm. She put her hand on the bark. She thought about everything that had moved through the past 13 months. The drainage ditch, the envelope, the library, the bus to Briarton, the hidden letter in the workshop, the coffee shop in Wexler Falls, the hearing, the keys, the first night in the master bedroom, the kitchen garden coming back, the orchard, the pond, the dock she had not yet built but would build in the spring, Lila Riley turning a key. She thought about Augustus, who had watched this tree go gray in 1982 and had trusted that the right person would come. She thought about Florence, who had stood at his pond in 1965 in a summer dress and had walked away from the family and had raised a granddaughter on broth and practical shoes, and a single sentence about pride. She thought about May, 2 doors down on Hickory Lane, who had kept her porch light on. She thought you all did your jobs. She said out loud to the tree, "Thank you." She walked back up the path. She let herself into the kitchen. The shelf above the sink now held 4 objects in a row. The jar of Florence's September preserves. The small jar of autumn wild honey she had bought at the farmer's market with the last of her $4.37. The beeswax candle. And the frame photograph from the 1965 Bracken Gazette. She lit the candle. She stood at the shelf. She thought about all the women whose names she now carried, all the silences they had held, all the choices they had made that no one had ever seen. She thought about the choice she had made in January when she had handed Cyrus a letter in a coffee shop instead of in a courtroom. She thought about the way that choice had cost nothing in the end and had returned more than she had any right to expect. She thought about how the world she lived in now was not the world she had been preparing for in the drainage ditch. In that world, she had been preparing for the next bad surprise. In this world, she was preparing for the next planting season, the next visit from Cyrus, the next case the foundation would take. The next morning at the pond, the first ice of winter when she would walk down with Cyrus and learn from a 71-year-old man with hands like his great-uncle's how to test the thickness of ice and what to look for. She blew out the candle. She walked into the main room. The fire she had laid that afternoon had burned down to coals. She put on 2 more logs. The fire caught. The room warmed. She sat on the floor in front of the fireplace, the way she had on her first night here in April, when she had owned the house but had not yet fully moved in. She had brought a chair down from one of the upstairs bedrooms. Since then, an old wooden one she had found, and Jasper had stabilized, but tonight she sat on the floor. She put her hands flat on the hardwood. She felt the stone of the house around her, the fire in front of her, the dark outside, and the property in the dark, and the dead elm at the eastern edge and the pond at its low silver shine under the stars, and the orchard on the south slope where the keeper had given its first crop in years. She thought, I am 23. She thought, I will be here a long time. She thought, I will not be in a hurry. Outside, the November wind moved through the property, through the oaks and the apple trees and the timber stand, through the kitchen garden's dormant beds, past the pond and the flat stone at its edge, along the eastern fence line, through the bare and patient branches of the dead elm that had held an envelope for 37 years and given it to the right person when she came. The fire burned. The house held. She stayed.